Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Journeyman Podcast. This is episode 26, and we're diving into some really interesting commentary today.
Yeah, this should be a fun one.
Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you're enjoying the show.
It really helps us out.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into some commentary from Greg Gutfeld on government spending.
Okay.
We'll be unpacking his thoughts on wasteful projects, the national debt, and a pretty intriguing idea he has about giving taxpayers a dividend.
Interesting.
All the sources we'll be discussing are linked in the episode description.
Yeah.
Ready to dive in?
Absolutely. Let's go. Gutfeld's commentary is super interesting because it taps into a real concern a lot of people have right now. Is the government wasting our tax dollars?
Right.
And if so, what can be done about it?
Yeah.
He uses humor and some pretty outlandish examples to get people thinking critically about this issue.
Yeah, he definitely doesn't hold back. He uses this phrase, leftist slush fund, to describe what he sees as wasteful spending on projects that don't benefit the average American.
I see.
And he throws out some pretty wild examples like shrimp treadmills and drag queen workshops in Ecuador.
Now, it's important to remember that Gutfeld is known for using satire and hyperbole in his commentary.
Right.
He's a conservative commentator with a knack for making a point in a way that really gets your attention. When he talks about a leftist slush fund, he's using a loaded term to suggest that government funds are being misused for projects that align with a particular political agenda.
Okay.
So by using those vivid examples, he's really trying to make people question where their tax dollars are going.
Yeah.
He also brings up the example of Stacey Abrams' nonprofit receiving $2 billion in taxpayer funding.
Wow.
And he pointedly mentions that this happened shortly after she endorsed Joe Biden.
That's a good example of how Gutfeld tries to connect specific spending decisions to a broader narrative of government waste and potential corruption.
The implication is that this funding might not have been allocated solely on merit, but could have been influenced by political maneuvering.
Right.
It's a claim that's hard to prove definitively, but it definitely raises questions about transparency and accountability in government spending.
It makes you think, right?
Absolutely.
And this all ties into Gutfeld's larger concern about the national debt.
Okay.
He paints a pretty alarming picture, suggesting that it could destroy the country within the next decade if we don't get it under control.
Now, Gutfeld might be laying on the drama a bit thick here,
Yeah.
but the national debt is a very real issue.
Right.
It's been steadily increasing for decades, and a lot of experts agree that it could have serious consequences for the economy if we don't address it. We're talking potentially higher interest rates, inflation, and even a possible financial crisis down the line.
It's not just some abstract concept. It has the potential to impact all of us in a very real way.
Right.
So what does Gutfeld propose we do about it?
Yeah, what's the solution?
Well, he has this idea he calls DOGE,
DOGE.
which involves giving taxpayers a dividend funded by cuts to government spending.
Interesting.
Right. He suggests taking a portion of the money saved by cutting those leftist slush fund projects and giving it directly back to American citizens.
Interesting.
He even puts numbers on it.
Okay.
20% to taxpayers and 20% towards paying down the national debt.
Wow. That's a pretty significant chunk.
He compares this to the Robin Hood story,
Okay.
taking from the corrupt government and giving back to the people.
I see.
It's a pretty startling image.
Yeah.
And I think it's meant to appeal to a sense of fairness and frustration with the current system. But I mean, is that actually a realistic solution?
Well, it certainly raises a lot of interesting questions.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you could argue that it's a way to restore some balance, returning money that was perhaps unjustly taken from taxpayers in the first place.
Right.
It could also be seen as a way to incentivize people to support further spending cuts,
Okay.
even if those cuts mean scaling back on programs that they themselves might benefit from.
So it's almost like a way to gain political capital for a larger agenda of reducing government spending.
Exactly.
Right.
Political capital is basically the goodwill and influence that a politician or party has with the public.
Got it.
By giving people money back, Gutfeld suggests you could gain their support for even more drastic spending cuts down the line.
Interesting.
But of course, this also raises questions about whether it's ethical to essentially bribe people into supporting a particular political agenda.
Definitely some food for thought there.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there.
And Gutfeld isn't alone in this discussion.
Right.
He has a panel of guests on his show who weigh in with their own perspectives on these issues.
Makes sense.
What were some of the key takeaways from their discussion?
Well, one of Gutfeld's panelists, Charlie Hurt, makes an interesting point. He argues that forcing Democrats to defend some of these spending choices, even the seemingly small ones, like that transit-themed Sesame Street in Africa, actually exposes their vulnerabilities.
It's like those specific examples, even if they don't represent a huge chunk of the budget, become symbolic of a larger pattern of wasteful spending.
Exactly. And by highlighting them, Gutfeld and his panelists are trying to shift the conversation and put pressure on those who advocate for increased government spending.
I see.
Another panelist, Emily Compagno, suggests that giving taxpayers money back through that DOGE dividend could be a powerful way to build momentum for continuing to cut government programs.
So it's not just about giving people their money back. It's about using that as a way to gain support for a broader agenda of fiscal conservatism.
Precisely.
Okay.
Compagno argues that when people see a tangible benefit from spending cuts like extra money in their pockets, they're more likely to support further cuts, even if it means cutting programs they might personally benefit from.
It's a pretty savvy political strategy, even if it might sound a bit cynical to some people.
It definitely raises questions about whether this approach is truly about responsible governance or more about manipulating public opinion for political gain.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Yeah.
But Gutfeld seems pretty passionate about this whole thing.
He does.
He talks about wanting to continue on the warpath, aggressively cutting spending, and exposing what he calls the toxic tumors within the government.
It's interesting how he uses such strong, almost militaristic language to describe his approach to government spending. He clearly sees this as a battle against corruption and waste. And he wants to rally people to his cause. He even compares waking up every morning to the day after Halloween. Finding a bag of candy.
I like that.
Meaning more evidence of government excess.
That's a pretty vivid image, and it definitely plays into that sense of outrage and frustration that a lot of people feel about government spending. But he also seems to recognize that it takes more than just anger to create real change. He talks about the need for persuasion for getting the public on board with his agenda.
And that's where that DOGE dividend comes into play. It's not just about fiscal responsibility, it's about incentivizing people, giving them a direct stake in the outcome of these spending cuts.
I see.
It's a way to appeal to their self-interest and make them feel like they're directly benefiting from a smaller government.
It's a shrewd tactic, even if it's not necessarily the most fiscally responsible approach in the long run. After all, even if the dividend helps pay down the debt a little bit, it's not going to magically solve the problem.
And Gutfeld acknowledges that.
But
he argues that it's about buying time, creating breathing room to build that political capital and keep pushing for more fundamental change. He's playing the long game, trying to shift the entire conversation around government spending and create a lasting change in how we think about the role of government.
So he's not just a commentator. He's almost like an activist, using his platform to rally people to his cause. And he seems to be having an impact.
It seems like it.
He mentions that this new approach is already causing the Democrats to flounder, suggesting that it's shifting the political landscape in a significant way.
It's certainly shaking things up, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in the long run. Will this focus on government waste and the national debt continue to gain momentum?
Who knows?
Will the idea of a taxpayer dividend gain traction among policymakers?
Good questions.
Only time will tell. But Gutfeld's commentary has definitely injected a new level of urgency and intensity into the debate.
And that's what effective commentary does, It challenges us to think critically, question our assumptions, and consider new possibilities.
For sure.
Even if we don't agree with everything Gutfeld says, he's forcing us to engage with these important issues in a new and thought-provoking way.
Absolutely. It's about sparking a wider conversation, getting people talking and thinking about the choices we make as a society and the future we want to create.
Now, we've talked a lot about Gutfeld's perspective.
We have.
But what about you? What stands out to you from all of this?
Well,
what are your thoughts on government spending, the national debt, and this idea of a taxpayer dividend?
Well, it's fascinating to see how Gutfeld frames these issues and the kinds of solutions he proposes. He's really tapping into a sense of frustration that a lot of people feel about the way the government spends their money.
Hmm.
Whether or not you agree with his specific approach, he's definitely raising some important questions.
Yeah, and he's not just sitting back and complaining about it. He's actively trying to change the conversation and push for a different approach.
Right.
He even mentions that he's going on a live tour in 2025,
Oh, wow.
hitting up states like Indiana, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, and Texas.
It's interesting that he's taking his message directly to the people like that, almost like a political campaign. It speaks to the power of his platform and the connection he has with his audience. He's clearly struck a chord with a lot of people who are concerned about government waste and the growing national debt.
It makes you wonder if this kind of activism could actually lead to real policy changes.
Yeah, could we see a shift towards more fiscal conservatism and a greater focus on reducing government spending?
It's hard to say for sure, but Gutfeld's commentary is definitely part of a larger trend.
Right.
We're seeing more and more people questioning the role of government
Yeah,
and demanding greater accountability when it comes to how our tax dollars are spent.
for sure.
And that kind of pressure from the public can definitely influence policymakers.
Absolutely.
So even if you don't agree with everything Gutfeld says,
Right.
he's pushing us to think critically about these issues and engage in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
And ultimately, that's what's important. We
Exactly.
can't just sit back and wait for someone else to fix things.
Nope. We got to take action.
We have a responsibility to educate ourselves, make our voices heard, and hold our elected officials accountable.
Couldn't agree more.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a question that Gutfeld himself poses.
Okay, shoot.
If the government is truly as wasteful and corrupt as he suggests, is it ever ethical to accept money back from them through something like that DOGE dividend?
Mm.
Is it a form of complicity, or is it simply reclaiming what was rightfully ours in the first place?
It's a tough question.
Yeah, it is.
And there's no easy answer.
But it's definitely something worth thinking about.
Absolutely food for thought.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
It flew by.
We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking.
Yeah.
Don't forget to check out the links in the episode description to explore the source material for yourself. And feel free to share your thoughts and reflections in the comments.
Definitely.
And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell a friend.
Yeah, spread the word.
We'll be back next time with another deep dive into a topic that's sure to get you thinking.
Can't wait.
Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.